If you love gripping Wild West tales filled with mystery, danger, and unexpected bonds, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's ride into the tale. The plain stretched wide and empty beneath the fading sun, a land carved by silence and the slow rhythm of seasons. For 9 long years, the rancher had lived here without a companion, save for his cattle, his horse, and the ghosts that sometimes slipped into his dreams. His name was known to a few in the nearest town, though they rarely saw him. When he rode in for supplies, he kept his hat low, his words brief, and his eyes hard. Folks whispered he had lost too much once, and a man who loses too much tends to keep what's left close. Every morning was the same. He rose before dawn, stoked the fire, boiled his coffee, and stepped out into the chill to mend whatever the wind or wolves had undone in the night. The fences always needed fixing, the cattle always needed tending, and the prairie, though beautiful, gave him no more comfort than a desert gives a thirsty man. He worked because work kept his mind from wandering into the darker corridors of memory. Evenings, when the cattle bedded down and the stars broke wide across the sky, he sometimes stood by the corral and listened to the coyotes yip. Their cries reminded him of voices from a world he no longer trusted. He had sworn never to open his door to another soul, not after the last time he had opened his heart. The price of company was grief, and he had paid in full. That promise held until the night the storm came. It was the kind of storm that clawed at the land like a wild animal, lightning cutting jagged lines against the clouds, thunder shaking the rafters. He had just thrown another log on the fire when he heard it, a sound half hidden by the rain. A thud. A dragging scrape. Then silence. His brow tightened, hand closing around the rifle he kept propped near the door. When he opened it, the wind shoved against him, carrying the smell of wet earth and ozone. At his feet lay a figure crumpled in the mud. For a heartbeat, he thought it might be a boy. But when he knelt, lantern light revealed a young girl, her dark hair plastered to her face, her skin marked with cuts and bruises. She was native, no older than 14 or 15, dressed in torn buckskin, and bleeding from a gash along her side. He froze. His first thought was not of pity, but of danger. If she belonged to one of the nearby tribes, what would they think if they found her here, on his land, under his roof? If she had enemies, they might already be tracking her, and any man seen harboring her could find himself caught in the crossfire of a feud that was not his. He almost shut the door. Almost. But her lips moved. A breath, weak as the flutter of a sparrow's wing, pushed past them. He didn't know the words, yet the tone carried something he couldn't ignore, plea, desperation, a thread of life unraveling fast. With a muttered curse, he slid his arms beneath her and carried her inside. She weighed next to nothing, her body fever-hot despite the storm's chill. He laid her by the fire and fetched water, rags, and the old tin box of supplies he rarely touched. His hands, calloused from rope and plow, moved with surprising gentleness as he cleaned the wound and bound it as best he could. She stirred once, eyes fluttering open just long enough to reveal their dark, alert depths. Then she sank back into unconsciousness. The rancher leaned back, chest heaving as though he had fought a battle. He stared at her for a long while, jaw tight, every instinct warning him this was a mistake. He had kept to himself for nearly a decade. Trouble had finally found its way to his door. Hours dragged by. The storm beat against the windows. He sat in his chair, rifle across his lap, watching the firelight play over her face. She was young. Too young to be out here alone. He wondered who she was running from, what kind of hell had driven her into his arms. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself that come morning, he would put her on a horse and send her east toward town. Let someone else bear the weight. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. Close to dawn, when the thunder faded into silence, she stirred again. Her lips parted, and this time the words that fell out were in broken English. They were coming. Her voice cracked, no louder than a whisper. Then her eyes closed, and she fell limp once more. The rancher sat rigid in his chair, pulse pounding. Whoever she had fled from was still out there, hunting. And now, by chance or by choice, he was tied to her fate. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the dark. He tightened his grip on the rifle, gaze flicking to the door. He had lived alone for 9 years by keeping to himself, by avoiding the quarrels and wars that plagued other men. But all at once, those years of silence felt fragile, as if a single dawn could shatter them. He drew in a breath, slow and deliberate, and stared at the unconscious girl beside his hearth. She had brought danger to his threshold, no doubt. But she had also brought something else, something he had forgotten how to name. By the time the first light broke over the horizon, he knew one thing for certain: his life would not remain his own. And though the night left more questions than answers, he could not shake the feeling that destiny had just knocked at his door and collapsed into his arms. Dawn bled across the plains, pale gold spilling over the fences and dry grass. The rancher stood at the threshold of his cabin, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes sweeping the horizon. The girl lay inside, still breathing shallowly but steadier than the night before. Her whisper haunted him: "They're coming." He did not yet know who, or how many, but he felt it in the marrow of his bones. He had stepped into a storm, and there was no turning back. When he returned to the hearth, she was awake. Her gaze tracked him with a wary sharpness that belied her frail state. He set down a cup of water. She took it, trembling hands clutching the tin, then sipped. When her voice came, halting and quiet, it carried both strength and fear. She told him her name, short, clipped, difficult on his tongue. She spoke in fragments of English, but enough that he pieced together the tale. Raiders had struck her camp. Not soldiers, not a rival band, but white men, hard-eyed and ruthless. They killed without mercy, stealing horses and food. She had run, carrying something they wanted. From beneath her torn clothing, she drew a small pouch. Inside lay a silver locket, worn and tarnished, but with a family crest etched into its face. The rancher frowned. He recognized it. Not the family itself, but the kind of thing that belonged to wealth, to connections in town, not to men riding under no flag. It told him one thing: she had stumbled into a crime deeper than a raid. She was a witness, perhaps the only one alive. He said little. Words had never been his way. But the girl read the change in his face. She asked if he would send her away. He thought of it, thought of saddling a horse, pointing her toward town, and letting fate take her from there. Yet when her eyes met his, something hardened in him. He had lived too long behind his walls of silence. To turn her away now would not just be cowardice, it would be betrayal of what little humanity he had left. The days that followed carved a rhythm he hadn't expected. She recovered slowly, helping where she could, stubborn even in her weakness. She gathered water, mended what her hands could, and tried to copy his tasks with fierce determination. He caught glimpses of the spirit that had carried her through the night to his door, fierce, unyielding, unwilling to bow. In her resilience, he saw a reflection of what he once had been before the world had stripped it from him. But the land whispered danger. Hoofprints marred the edge of his range, too fresh to ignore. A cow turned up dead, not from wolves, but from a bullet. Smoke smeared the sky to the north. Whoever hunted her was closing in. He could not pretend the threat would pass him by. That night, he prepared. The girl watched him clean his rifle, sharpen his knife, and set iron traps by the fences. She asked if he was afraid. He told her yes, though his voice did not shake. Fear was not new to him, it was what came after fear that mattered. She nodded, as though satisfied. Without prompting, she picked up a box of cartridges and asked how to load them. For a long time, he stared at her, caught between the instinct to shield her and the knowledge that she would not accept it. At last, he showed her. Her fingers fumbled, but she did not complain. The night grew still, heavy with expectation. When they came, it was sudden. Horses thundered across the plain, dark shapes against the moonlight. Voices rose, harsh and mocking. Shots cracked, splinters flying from the ranch walls. The rancher shoved the girl down and returned fire, his rifle steady, his aim deadly. One rider fell, then another. The rest spread wide, circling like wolves. The rancher's heart pounded with an old, forgotten fire. For years he had locked away his rage, his grief, his skill. Now it surged back, not for vengeance, but for protection. He moved with precision, every bullet placed with intent. The girl, crouched behind the woodpile, reloaded as he had taught her, passing cartridges into his waiting hand without hesitation. When one raider broke through the fence, she snatched a fallen pistol and fired. The shot missed, but it startled the man long enough for the rancher's bullet to end him. The fight raged on, flames licking the barn as a lantern was hurled into the hay. Smoke choked the air, but the rancher did not falter. He fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose, and had just found something worth risking everything for. His world, once small and silent, roared with chaos, and he welcomed it. At last, silence fell. The remaining raiders fled into the night, leaving their dead in the dirt. The ranch stood battered, the barn half in ashes, the corral broken. But the cabin still stood, and so did they. The girl leaned against the doorway, face streaked with soot, eyes bright with fierce triumph. The rancher lowered his rifle, chest heaving, and for the first time in 9 years, a rough laugh tore from his throat. It was not joy, not yet, but it was life. In the aftermath, he walked the yard, checking the fallen. Among them, he found a man wearing a badge of the town, a deputy, or once was. The locket in the girl's pouch suddenly made cruel sense. These raiders were not outlaws cast from society. They were society's own, cloaked in law by day, murderers by night. The truth she carried was poison to men of power. The rancher looked to the girl. She met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted, unbroken despite all she had lost. She asked what they would do now. He thought of the ashes of his barn, the graves he had dug before, the lonely years he had endured. He thought of the fire in her eyes and the way she had stood beside him when the night tried to swallow them whole. He answered with no hesitation. They would ride at dawn, take the locket and the truth into town, and face whatever storm awaited. His days of hiding were over. The land had given him silence, but it had taken his soul. This girl, wounded and defiant, had returned it to him. As the sun climbed, painting the sky in blood and gold, the rancher saddled his horse. She climbed up behind him, clutching the pouch close. The road ahead promised danger, betrayal, and perhaps death. Yet for the first time in nearly a decade, he welcomed the road. Together they turned east, toward town, toward reckoning. And as the ranch faded into the distance, the man who had sworn to live alone forever felt a strange, steady certainty. His solitude had ended the moment she collapsed at his door, and the rest of his life had just begun.